Welcome to the Institute for Strategic Policy Solutions. My name is Kimberly Jackson, and I'm the Executive Director. I'm so honored to have this program today on sea level rise. It's an important conversation that we need to have for a variety of reasons, but particularly because it impacts Florida greatly. My colleague today and moderator for this program is Christian Moriarty, who is very seasoned in this area, and I think will delight today. He can bring about a lot of robust conversation, and I'm grateful that he's taking the time today to take the lead. But let me share a few things about Christian, who is the professor of ethics and law at St. Petersburg College, and he received his BA in psychology and his MA in bioethics from the University of South Florida. He also has his JD from Stetson University College of Law, which is my alma mater, and I'm proud of that. He teaches currently applied ethics, medical ethics, business ethics, legal ethics, business law, and the law of photography and art. Professor Moriarty resides in Tampa Bay with his wife, and he engages in personal fitness and plays with video games on occasion in his spare time. And Christian, I can't thank you enough for everything that you do for our school and for our community. But in this particular case, I'm anxious to see what you have to say. Thanks a lot.
Well, thank you to Executive Director Kim Jackson, and thank you so much for outing me as both simultaneously a jock and a nerd. That's always deeply appreciated. Welcome all to our session on rising waters. This panel will discuss state policy, how Florida can move forward, and the everyday impact that sea level rise is having on our businesses and our homes. So before we get going, I'd like to introduce our esteemed panel. We have some really tremendous folks that are joining us today, and I'm really excited to introduce them. First, our State Senator, Ana Marie Rodriguez. Ana Marie Rodriguez is the State Senator for Florida's 39th District, which includes portions of Miami-Dade County and all of Monroe County. She was elected in November of 2020 and served previously in the Florida House of Representatives 105th District from 2018 to 2020. As State Senator, Ana Maria has worked on many issues that are important to improving the quality of life for all South Floridians. And as the mother of school-age children, Ana Maria has supported record funding for the public school system, as well as school choice policies that empower parents to make better decisions for their children's education. Senator, it is very glad for us to have you. Thank you very much for being here. Next on our esteemed panel is J.P. Brooker. J.P. Brooker was born and raised in Florida on the Indian River Lagoon in Brevard County. His family first came to Florida from the Bahamas in the 1850s, eventually settling in Key West and Tampa. His work as a marine conservationist started at the young age of 15, and he earned the Boy Scouts of America highest achievement, the Eagle Scout Award, and his work restoring the mangroves at Florida's Olame Wildlife Preserve. After several years abroad, JP returned home to rededicate himself to protecting what he loved ever since he was a kid, Florida's unique environment. As the Director of Florida Conservation in St. Petersburg, Florida, JP has deep experience on federal fisheries issues in the southeastern United States and on Capitol Hill. JP, it is very glad for you to join us. Thank you very much for being here. Next on our esteemed panel is Mitchell Chester. Mitchell Chester Esquire is a civil trial lawyer practicing in Florida for 43 years. He is a member of the American Board of Trial Advocates Fort Lauderdale chapter, which was named him Trial Lawyer of the Year in 2016 and 2020. He has a passionate commitment to the community, justice, and innovation. AV rated by Martindale-Hubbell, Mr. Chester supports the 7th Amendment to the United States Constitution, which preserves the right to have a jury trial in civil controversies. Mitchell Chester is so glad for you to be joining us. Thank you very much for being here. And finally, on our esteemed panel, John Englander. John Englander is an oceanographer, multi-book author, and authority specializing in rising sea level and climate change. His mission is to help businesses and communities adapt to a world with rapidly changing climate and rising seas. And for over 30 years, he has been a leader in the private and nonprofit sectors, serving as CEO for such noteworthy organizations as the Cousteau Society and International Seakeepers. Mr. Englander advises businesses and governmental agencies and communities on the risks and opportunity of increased flooding due to the rising seas, extreme tides, severe storms, and of course, advocating for intelligent adaptation. John Englander, thank you so much for being here. We're really looking forward to your thoughts on today's subject. So before we get going on our moderated questions for our panel, I want to let everybody in the audience know that to please feel free to post your questions in the Q&A section of Zoom. You can find that at the bottom of your screen. We will be happy to take your questions towards the end of the panel. In the meantime, do not hesitate to chat in the chat with each other and bring all of your comments into that section. Happy to see all of your comments there as well. But if you have any questions specifically for the panel, be sure that you put it into the Q&A section so we can see it there. All right, well, now that we've gotten our housekeeping issues out of the way, I'd like to get right into our conversation. So first, I want to put to, I was originally going to say to the smart people on the panel, but that is every single one of these people. And this is open to the panel. As I always say to my students, how can we talk about the thing without defining the thing? We're here to talk about sea level rise. So in your own words, how would you describe the sea level rise that we may be already experiencing, or we might be experiencing within the next several years to decades, and what can we expect from that? So anybody can jump in there. Yeah, please.
Probably a place to start is NOAA released a report on Tuesday, as some of your viewers would be aware. It's their first report in 5 years looking at a sea level rise outlook. So NOAA, of course, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, is the U.S. probably best authority or most accepted governmental agency. And just to put it on the table, they said that they would look at projections of 10 to 12 inches by mid-century, by the year 2050, roughly. And by the end of the century, between 2 and 7 feet of sea level rise as a global average. So that's probably a good starting marker.
And these issues that John has raised impact our communities both now and in the future financially. Sea level rise requires adaptation individually and by government levels, state, county, and federal as well. And it impacts every single person watching this and your families. Be happy to get into that later, but it's an enormously important issue now to plan for the future and for the coming years.
I would just add that sea level rise is something that we're seeing firsthand in Florida on Floridian waterways. All you have to do is go in your backyard, go out to Boca Ciega Bay, and you can see water levels rising. You can see the impacts of a changing climate everywhere around us. Waters are rising, waters are warming, fish migration patterns are changing, animals are behaving differently because of this changing environment all around us, and sea level rise is one indicator of that, and it's something that we as Floridians are seeing on a daily basis.
Right.
Senator, there you go.
Yes, if I may chime in, yes. For me, sea level rise just means being more adaptive and more able to adjust to what's going on around us. I agree with what some of my colleagues said in terms of, personal responsibility as well as government responsibility. I think a lot of people have learned that they can't depend on government to do everything that's needed to be resilient. And so it's exciting to see a lot of programs that have surged out of this sea level rise phenomenon, like the PACE program that help people finance hardening their homes and things of that nature. So I'm excited to delve into that topic a little further in our conversation.
Well, Senator, while we have you, maybe let's go straight there. What are your thoughts on that?
So obviously, everybody knows sea level rise is happening. Some people deny it, but I think most of us have already accepted that it's a reality, it's happening, and we need to aggressively do what's necessary to preserve our, everything we have around us. So one of the pieces of legislation that I filed last year, and I actually filed it again this year, but in a slightly different format, would basically allow people who are getting PACE loans to add septic to sewer conversions as well as hardening of seawalls. When the PACE program was created I want to say it was like 20 years ago, it was created with the intention of helping people finance making their homes more resilient. For example, you could get solar panels on your roof, you could get impact windows, you could do all kinds of things that basically, again, harden your property. And so I'm a big believer in giving people the tools that they need to adapt and to make sure that their investments, their largest investment that they'll probably ever make in their lifetime is their home, making sure that they have the resources that they need to have that property be well taken care of and have everything that it needs to survive, whether it's a hurricane or flooding or any type of natural phenomenon that, as we see, have been happening more and more frequently over the last years.
That's wow, that's a lot. So others on the panel, maybe what else are you seeing in Florida policy that's going on, or maybe potential future policy that you think is coming down the pike or might be a good idea?
If I might, I'd like to talk about future policy, because I'm not seeing enough from the state legislature. I'm certainly not seeing enough at any level of government, although people are trying. And Senator, I applaud your efforts and the initiatives that you've taken, but we need to look further at the real predicate, the real groundwork for what we're dealing with. We need to understand the impact on mortgages for people that are in threatened areas and what they'll be able to do to avoid foreclosures, and devise programs to be able to keep them in their homes while they're building or relocating and saving for relocating. We need to look at how we protect credit scores. That's a national issue. We need to look at what financial consultants are doing and not, with regard to advising people about how they can plan for this. We need to look at our tax policy and whether people get credits or deductions for doing the kinds of things necessary to try to weather sea level rise as long as they can. But let's be clear, that's a temporary thing, because ultimately we're going to be looking at what I call cooperative relocation. It's sometimes called managed retreat. There are unfunded mandates for local governments and so forth. And so there's a number of different things we need to look at that get into the financial aspect. Programs are not in place. The public is not aware. They are not planning, and we are opening ourselves up every day to being ill prepared in the future when it's too late.
I would add to what the senator and what Mitch have said. Hardening is an important thing that obviously homeowners need to do to protect their biggest asset, as the senator said. But we also need to be looking at things beyond gray infrastructure investments. We need to be looking at investing in our coastal ecosystems and the incredible services that they provide. Mangroves, for example, provide incredible coastal buffering services, as do coral reefs. And we need policies that focus on protecting those tremendous natural resources that Florida really counts as her crowning jewel. 1,000 people are moving to Florida every day, and they're moving to Florida because of those types of resources. They want to come spend time in the sunshine, and they want to take advantage of this iconic environment that we have. And so we need to be investing in that environment, not just because of its natural beauty, but because of the important ecosystem services that it provides as a frontline protection against sea level rise.
Christian?
Please.
So one thing is probably useful to clarify, because there have been a lot of good ideas and good points and good aspects already put on the table, so to speak. But let's separate a couple of things perhaps to for our audience particularly. When we think of sea level rise and we talk about it, we're seeing it. We tend to see it at king tide events. Okay, so the tides aren't getting any, the moon's not getting any bigger or closer. That the tides aren't changing, but the base level is changing. Sea level is hard to see though, because it's like a drip filling the bucket. It happens very slowly. Right now, the global sea level increase is about 1/4 of an inch a year. Very hard to notice, but it's the rate of acceleration. It's getting into probably exponential growth. So like the pandemic, we've learned how when things get into high rates of growth and abrupt change of the rate of change, that they can surprise us. And sea level will be like that, because to go from 1/4 of an inch to perhaps a foot by mid-century is just hard to imagine, but it does happen. It's happened in the geologic past. I like to separate the, I call the 5 forms of flooding plus erosion, because we tend to see water as having all the same character. We all are familiar in Florida with, I live on the east coast of Florida, by the way, but we're familiar with storms. Hurricanes are, of course, the iconic image of a storm. And storms are a well-known phenomenon, and they're changing a little bit, but it's a well understood and recognized phenomena. We're getting more rainfall, which is going with a warmer planet. At the same time, we're getting more drought. So you're seeing this all over the world, but we see it here in Florida, just as they see it in California. There's more drought and more deluge rain, which turns into runoff and ponding water during rainfall events. So those are different than sea level rise, but also cause flooding. And then we have the high tides, the king tides or spring tides. So we have storms, rain, runoff, tides, which are short-term flood events that can happen quite quickly. Sea level rise is that 1/4 inch a year at the moment, but it does, like a drip filling the bucket, raise the base level. And so we are seeing it during the peak tide events, as several people alluded to. So that's one point. The second thing I would just clarify is that when we think of things like solar panels, which I think the senator mentioned, and they're great, I have them in my house, that helps get us off fossil fuels and reduces greenhouse gases, but that has to be tackled in aggregate for the world, because all the greenhouse gases pool up in the atmosphere, and what we do won't affect temperature locally. But solar panels are really important from a climate standpoint, because when we have worse storms and the electric grid goes out, that we have security of power supply. So solar panels, as an example, aren't going to effectively slow sea level rise in the next 10, 20, 30 years, but may make a drip in the bucket compared to the global getting off of fossil fuels, which is great. But it also makes us more resilient for our own homes in terms of power outages, which is great too. So, but I've actually had people tell me that they're putting solar panels in to stop sea level from rising, and that just doesn't add up, actually. So it's just to distinguish those things, I thought might be helpful.
So from all 4 of our panelists, we have a lot of stuff that is going on now and potential that we can go on to the future. And I think what we have here is that this is something what we're doing right now is communicating to the public and to better educating on these issues. But one thing I think I want to ask you all is, how successful do you think we are at communicating with the public about these important issues? And maybe how can we improve? What should be the next steps? How do we get this information to as many people as possible so we can get as much support with these really good policy ideas? Yeah, Mitch, please.
Well, many years ago, about 3 or 4 years ago, we started a channel called Climate Monitor on streaming TV, and it was all devoted to climate. Streaming TV since then has become much more popular and easy to use. Florida should have a streaming TV channel that is devoted to climate change and environmental issues, that educates people on how to make their homes more resilient, how to understand financially what their responsibilities and opportunities are in the future, and to have leaders and think tanks and so forth brainstorm with ideas to educate people. That kind of effort should start with the middle schools, the high schools, all the way up until the senior citizens. We don't do enough to educate in this state. And frankly, this is a bipartisan issue. Everybody on the Republican side, Democratic side, should encourage education. So I would urge that. I also believe that the condominium and HOA, the homeowners association laws, should be required to have an annual meeting about how sea level rise impacts their communities. It's not just the coastal communities. It's the unfunded mandates for areas like Orlando, where people will move from certain highly affected areas, let's say in Miami-Dade County, in the senator's district, so that the burden financially on the Orlando area will be understood and planned for. So we have a lot to do to educate people. And frankly, just to stop for a moment, I think there ought to be a class, a bipartisan approved class in high school about climate change, including with an emphasis in Florida on SLR, sea level rise.
That's a lot of good policy right there. does anybody else want to jump on this? What do you think? How are we doing? Senator, please.
Yeah, so yeah, I think education is very important, getting the word out about what's being done from a policy perspective, not just at the state level, but at the local, the municipal levels. Miami Beach is a great example of, a city that took the bull by the horns and, invested, somewhere around $45 million in pumps and elevation of streets and other things to basically harden their infrastructure. And like Miami Beach, there's other examples of municipalities that kind of, with obviously assistance from the state and federal funds, took matters into their hands and made things happen. And now you're seeing the fruits of everything they've invested. I also think it's important to tell the story, not just domestically here in Florida or in the United States, but to tell the story of what we're doing abroad. I work, just as an aside, I work for the Miami Association of Realtors. That's my day job. And we obviously hear from people like foreign investors, people who want to purchase properties in Miami or in South Florida. And, when you go abroad, that is, what you're hearing is, sea level rise. That's like people's biggest, top of mind concern is, if I buy a property in Florida or on the coast, is it going to be around in 20 years or 15 years or, whatever. So, telling the story of, from a policy perspective, as well as from an actual things that are being done, what can we tell people? And again, there are already mechanisms in place to communicate with people. You just have to get the word out. Unfortunately, I think the press sometimes is not our friend. I think historically, because, Florida is a Republican dominated state in the House and the Senate, and obviously in the governor's mansion, no matter how much we do, even if we do like everything perfect, and I think we're doing a lot from a funding perspective and a policy perspective, the story is never going to be, it's just not favorable. Unfortunately, that's just the way it is. But we keep working hard regardless of what the narrative is, because we're not doing it for the narrative. We do it because we know we need to do it for our constituents, for the future generations, and it's the right thing to do. And we have been doing it to the tune of millions of dollars that we've been investing in Everglades restoration, coral reef restoration, and so many other projects that, as one of my colleagues said earlier, those are natural, barriers that already help with this problem. And so we just need to continue investing in those things as well.
Well, I think that's true, but I think we have to be clear when we educate people that protecting coral reefs, which are near and dear to my heart. I used to be in the diving industry for 20 or 30 years and lived in the Bahamas, so I have some commonality there. But coral reefs have minor connection with sea level rise. The Everglades has a small connection with sea level rise. We need to distinguish the things or connect the things where they're appropriate, and also help people see the difference, because it drives me a little crazy when I hear people say, well, we should do more recycling, or we should get plastic bags out of the ocean, which are both important. They have nothing to do with climate change or sea level rise, okay? So we need to separate the issues so that when people are trying to get the world off fossil fuels and reduce the greenhouse gas levels from the 415 parts per million of carbon dioxide at the moment, that we're working on that with good intention, but we're not planning to use that to stop sea level rise because of the lag time and the heat that's in the ocean and melting Greenland there behind me and Antarctica, those huge ice sheets. So we have constant opportunities to educate, but a lot of times inadvertently, we confuse people. We tell them that solar panels or recycling will somehow stop climate change, okay? And in the aggregate, if the whole world went to solar energy over the next 30 years, yes, it would slow the warming, but it's not going to stop sea level rise. So there are some lines there we need to be a little more clear about, so that we don't, because I've had people come to me very upset to learn that something like recycling, which I do every day, really has no effect on climate change. Okay, they're both important to do, just like getting plastics out of the ocean is really important for marine life. But getting plastics out of the sea doesn't help slow climate change. So we need to draw some lines there between those different factors, which all may be ocean issues like coral reefs, like the green algae blooms that we're seeing now, that are choking the waters, or the red tides, okay, that are happening. Both those things are happening on a warmer planet with more nutrients in the water. So there is a connection, but there's not a cause and effect in terms of how do we deal with sea level rise.
I can definitely see that distinction being important. JP, what are your thoughts? Do you think we're doing good enough job in educating folks on rising tides, or what can we do better?
No, I certainly think we're not doing a good enough job, and I think there's always more to be done. And I think, Florida is increasingly doing more and needs to continue to do more. I think of, Governor DeSantis appointing the first chief resilience officer in Florida was a laudable step, and ultimately filling that role just recently with a scientist who is focused on, tying the threads of resilience together across the state, I think is very laudable, and it's something that Florida needs. It's also something that the state could do a better job promoting and saying we have this role. And it's something that the legislature, I know, is taking up this session to make that role permanent and not just a part of the governor's funding, but to make it authorized by statute, which I think is something that we'd really like to see. And I think is something that would go a long way in helping tell the story of climate resilience in Florida. And so I think the state could do a better job of tooting its own horn, as it were, on all of those things that the senator rightfully pointed out are being done, and and also shining a spotlight on what more needs to be done. So I think that there are some unique opportunities we have before the end of the session on March 11th, and I'm optimistic that we're going to see some continued positive change in that direction in years coming.
So these are a lot of good conversation points. And one thing that I think I'm noting, and it seems like some folks in our audience are noting as well, is that we all live in Florida. I'm born and raised in St. Petersburg, Florida myself, and very familiar with all of these things going on that we need to be paying attention to. So I think we're in agreement that there's an issue and that the issue needs to be addressed. I think one thing that maybe a lot of the Florida population, or perhaps maybe even people in this panel today, may not be agreeing on is exactly how to address it. So because it's such an important issue and we know we need to address it, how do you think we can come together to find some sort of middle here, if a middle exists? And how can we get to a point where we're all on the same page to make sure that we're addressing these important issues?
Well, we have to use clear terminology, and we almost need better definitions, because we talk about the climate change problem as if that's clear. I like to say there is no climate change problem. There's at least three problems. We have to slow the warming, which some people see as sustainability, and getting us eventually off of fossil fuels or taking the carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere. That's a problem. Then being resilient to more droughts, more rain, more wildfires, to more floods. That's different than slowing the warming, which is an aggregate global problem. And then sea level rise, which is now to some degree baked in, is separate than slowing the warming and also being resilient to floods that can happen next week, like from a storm or heavy rainfall, because sea level is that drip, drip, drip filling the bucket as Antarctica and Greenland melt. So it starts with clear terminology. And when we say the climate change problem, as if protecting the Everglades or coral reefs will somehow slow sea level rise, that's part of the confusion. So I think that we think we're communicating well, but we're really not. So I agree with your point. And the Everglades are really important to Florida, and it's a wonderful resource. But when sea level is 3 feet higher, which it will be one day, whether it's by the year 2060 or 2120, okay, that depends on what we do with the warming. The ecosystem of the Everglades is going to change dramatically. So we need to realize that. Sea level rise is I guess to make the obvious point, in case I didn't say it earlier, sea level rise can't be stopped at this point. And it's happened before. The last time sea level was higher naturally was 122,000 years ago. It got 25 feet higher than now. Sea level rise in the last ice age was 400 feet lower. So a little bit of the problem is we're a little bit ignorant from a geologic standpoint that sea level changed before and it's changing again. We've triggered this one. So there's a lot of need for education.
So it near and dear to my heart is that it's always coming back to education.
Right.
Senator, as our political expert, what are your thoughts on this? How can we find the middle on this?
Well, I agree with John on everything he said, and when I make my comments about the Everglades or about coral reef, yes, he is correct that sometimes the terms get conflated, and they are all different, and perhaps the coral reefs and the Everglades has very little, if any, impact on the rate at which sea level rise is occurring. But even if, let's say, and I just wanted to throw this in there because, I know someone put something in the chat about carbon emissions in Florida, which I think I would fully support doing something saying, oh, let's, lower the carbon emissions, as a state by X percentage by such and such year. You're looking at, when you look at the map of the globe and you see China and other countries that are producing, the vast majority of carbon emissions, in the world, no matter what Florida does, to, suppress that or lower that number, if you have bad actors in other parts of the world who are not doing what they need to do to collectively, effectuate change, for the whole world, then it's almost as if, I'm not saying that there's no point in doing it. Obviously, we need to continue with policies that are good and that will help, make that situation better. But, when you think about other people in the world who are not doing things the way they should.
Oh, she kind of.
We might have just lost the senator.
Recycled
Oh, there she is.
products, and they're not buying our recyclables anymore. So we don't have the infrastructure to even, and I know this has nothing to do with sea level rise, but we're talking a little bit about everything and the environment. There's a bigger picture here besides Florida, and yes, as a state, I think we are leading on numerous issues, but you will never see the impact that you need to see unless everybody is on the same page and working towards the same goal.
Well, to reinforce that, to agree with you, okay, that we're not going to stop the warming of the planet until the world deals with reducing greenhouse gases, particularly carbon dioxide. Absolutely true. So even if Florida went to zero emissions, if everybody in Florida next year was on a solar panel and cut the fossil fuels, okay, that's not going to stop sea level from rising. Okay, the world has to do that. So you're absolutely right. And so we need to look at that strategically. But the flip side of that is, since we can't, and even if the world went to zero emissions, by the way, that's not going to quickly stop sea level from rising because we've warmed the oceans. So we've got to really look at it as three parts. Okay, how do we as a world slow the warming? Okay, how can we locally contribute to that? But the specific risk, and the focus of today's panel, is sea level rise. Okay, we have to face this tough truth that getting off fossil fuels will not quickly stop sea level rise. So we have to begin preparing for it. And when we lump all environmental issues together, we tend to confuse that inadvertently. It's very easy to go from sea level rise to the manatees dying, to plastics in the ocean, to the coral reefs dying, and the algae blooms and so on. It's very easy to kind of look at them all as one and the same problem. And they really, from an educational standpoint and just terminology, we need to distinguish the things which are distinct. So I agree with the senator. We've got to do a better job in Florida, but the rest of the world also has to work on slowing the warming. But even if they did, sea level would still rise that first foot or two.
This is good, please, Senator.
Yeah, and just to kind of bring in John's point, like going back to our original topic about, I started with PACE, and somebody made a comment in the chat about, that it's a Band-Aid. Yes, it is a Band-Aid because it's not addressing the problem, which is the sea level rise. But as long as it's happening and it's there, you have to take measures to, again, harden your property, harden your possessions, and so that when these things do happen, that you can, make sure that your property is less impacted. And that's, again, it's not the solution. John Morales was the one who wrote that. I appreciate hearing from him. You're right. It's not the solution, but it is something that people can do and feel that they are protecting their assets. And that is important, for not only for the government to step up to the plate and do, what we need to do and invest in hardening communities, but also individuals doing their part, investing their assets as well.
So we're talking a lot about both national and local. JP, I'd like to hear your thoughts on this next point, is that to focus specifically on the threats that we have here in our own backyard in the state of Florida. From your perspective, what do you think, if you had to name the single most important challenge on this topic, what would you say is the most important thing that we need to confront?
Well, I mean, the senators mentioned coastal hardening quite a bit, and I think that that's going to be a significant challenge. And she also mentioned correctly that the city of Miami Beach has invested $45 million over X number of years. I mean, they'll have to invest $400 million by 2030 just to keep their roads above water and to keep from being completely inundated. And they've made a plan for that, and that's good, and they should make that plan. The city of Miami Beach is just one of 30 plus municipalities in Miami-Dade County, and there are 67 counties in the state of Florida. So you can see that the task ahead of us is daunting, and that's just in terms of hardening our infrastructure. There are other investments, which I mentioned before, green infrastructure investments, which I think we shouldn't dismiss the investment in something like mangroves or in the coastal buffering services that are provided in making these green investments. And I'm not trying to tie everything together, John, and I don't think you think I am, but I do think that there's two types of hardening that we need to take into account, and that's gray infrastructure investments, that's green infrastructure investments, and we also need to be planning down the line for inevitable abandonment, frankly, of certain infrastructure, which is just going to have to go by the wayside. You're already looking at Monroe County making plans for abandonment of certain infrastructure, certain highways, which simply will not, the cost benefit analysis shows that it will not be beneficial to rebuild those highways. And so, that's the kind of hard look that we need to be taking. What needs to be abandoned, and where economically and ecologically does it make sense to harden or to add green infrastructure investments. And I think it's that kind of balance that we need in this state.
JP, I certainly agree that mangroves are really important to be preserved and nurtured. They're a good buffer during storms. Technically, they absorb a little bit of carbon out of the carbon dioxide we'd like to take out of the atmosphere, but not that significant, by the way. But from the natural barriers for storm surge are really important. I totally agree. And but the other kinds of hardening, I'm sure many of your listeners know this on this webinar, but just in case, because South Florida has a lot of porous limestone, like the Bahamas, by the way, where our roots are, with porous limestone, the water will just come deep underground and up behind the seawall. So when people think that this proposed multi-billion-dollar seawall in Miami will be a barrier to sea level rise, they're misinformed. It will protect them from more storm waves during a next storm event, but that's a temporary flooding. Sea level rise, though, gets not only higher drip by drip or inch by inch, but it comes up through the porous rock, and you can't keep it out with seawalls. So it's all, we have to get a little more educated that there are different kinds of hardening and there's different goals of hardening. And hardening is not a simple solution, as you say.
So Mitch, what are your thoughts here? What do you see as the challenges?
I have a lot of thoughts. The Federal Reserve Bank of San Francisco in 2019 came out with a report that encouraged loans for consumers who seek to pay for climate adaptation measures. To follow up with the PACE program that the senator mentioned, We need to have programs where people can go into a bank and the banks can have specialized programs to say, here's how we're going to harden your house. Here's what we're going to help you afford rising your property, raising your driveways, your generators, et cetera, if you have them, if you're lucky enough to have them. Here's how we're going to help you financially without a problem of just ignoring it financially. So there are tools above the PACE program, which is innovative, but there are tools that can be brought to the forefront financially. But let's be clear and bring this to the dimension that really counts for everybody, whether they're watching this or not. It's money. It's money. And it's their financial security that is involved. It's a pocketbook issue. And so we need to look at the federal level and at the state level for kinds of deductions and credits that can be expanding upon the usual casualty loss. Sea level rise is not a casualty loss. It is an incremental increase, which is certain to happen. Just read John's books. It's clear. That's how I learned about sea level rise. And I learned a lot from John Morales, too, who was on this earlier with a comment. The bottom line is that we have to make sure that if you want to bring people together to understand this issue and not to stay like this, it affects their pocketbook. What Miami Beach does in terms of taking state and federal money impacts every taxpayer, or those that should be paying taxes too. What every other community does will impact incrementally and exponentially the impact on the state. And so we need to understand that we're dealing here with a threat to assets, a threat to the values of certain homes in certain communities. It's funny, I was at it's not funny at all. I was at the Norton Museum a number of years ago in West Palm Beach, and we listened to the ex-mayor of Miami Beach talk about sea level rise. And a lady comes up to me afterwards and she says, well, I'm not worried about sea level rise. I have a house on Palm Beach Island. It's worth 10.9 million or whatever. If I lose it, I lose it. That's not the average person. We've got to get the average person to understand that this is a threat financially. But there's something that JP said, and I'd like to address that too real quickly. The toxins and the pollution that are in our existing building structures, our built environment, one day in many areas will be inundated by the oceans. And so those toxins, those carpet chemicals, those the formaldehyde, there's a whole list that myself and former Mayor Philip Stoddard from South Miami put together. Those have to be secured. You can't just say, okay, well, the water's coming over, we couldn't stop it because it can't be stopped right now. And so, or for the foreseeable hundreds of years. And so we're just going to walk away from our property. And if that's true, what responsibility do we have when we just walk away from our homes? Or what can the government do, Senator, to encourage us to take this list there's a list of, I won't go through the whole thing, it'll make it a 2-hour seminar. There's so many toxins and pollutants that will seep into the oceans and kill our marine life, kill the ecosystems in the ocean. And the result will be that we won't have the kind of food sources we need for a growing population. So we came up with it, or actually Phil Stoddard came up with the idea of a restoration bond. If someone's going to develop on a beach, like they're, the awful tragedy at Surfside, they're going to build there again, they should be able to put up a bond to clean the property when the ocean inundates and makes it unusable. It shouldn't all be on the taxpayer, but this is a taxpayer issue. And this is affecting our future fiscal responsibilities and deficits. So when you talk about money, that's when you get everybody involved, including the people who are worried about their septic tanks in Miami-Dade County being inundated because of the water coming up through the porous limestone and how they're going to afford it. There are programs, but this is going to be a statewide issue, especially in the coastal areas. Money, money, money.
So, Senator, I don't know if you just heard Mitch as much as I did, but that's a lot that we need to be concerned about.
I took copious notes on Mitch's comments, and he is correct. I mean, it is going to take a lot of money. And as he stated, the government has to have a role in this, as he said, these properties that are going to be walked away from at some point, how do we address that? But taking it back just one step, because something similar is already happening, and that is and he touched on it very briefly, which is the septic tanks. Back in the day, before everything is now on sewer, where most communities are on sewer, a lot of people were on septic tanks, and the government has helped. The state of Florida over the last 4 years has invested heavily in septic to sewer conversions around the state of Florida, particularly in the Lake Okeechobee region and south of the lake, because we know that those areas are adversely affected, and we need to make sure that gets fixed. I'm proud to be the senator of Monroe County. I know we've talked a little bit about the Keys. Monroe County is almost 100% already on sewer. We've managed to get almost all of our properties on sewer, and I think this is a big first step in addressing this problem. The one about buying out properties addressing properties that people are going to walk away from that will have toxins in the ground. I personally have not thought that far ahead. I don't know how many people are actually in a situation where they're going to walk away from their properties. I know in the Keys there are some people, and there is money allocated for that through the Florida Keys Stewardship Act, for land acquisition and buying properties and things of that nature. But you've given me a lot of food for thought, to be honest. I know that these are all things that we're going to have to be discussing and thinking about funding over the next 15 to 20 and even 30 years.
Can I just interject something to follow up? The infrastructure bill passed by Congress that's been signed by the president does have some features that deal with relocation, which is what I think JP was talking about briefly. And so we're starting to see at the federal level a recognition. We've also seen, and I told people many years ago, that the laboratory for relocation, because there will be relocation. I may not be alive then, none of us may be around, but there will be relocation. And so the result is that we're starting to plan for that, but we need to understand it's not just Alaska and the movement of small villages in Alaska. It's not just Louisiana, and it's parts of Florida too. And so we need to understand that the federal government has a large role to play in that. And I'll give you one more example. Let's say you buy a house today in Western Miami Beach by Alton Road, and then it floods out enough, no matter what the pumps are doing. And you just bought this house, your realtor didn't tell you, you didn't know, you weren't educated. And then one day you wake up and you read on the internet that your home, your area has got 10 years left. What's going to happen then when a hardworking family, mother, father, or a single parent says, I can't afford my mortgage anymore? They've got to do something. They have to have some investment for a mortgage relocation loan to be able to afford that. And that gets into the area because it's not just, we're not just dealing with the issues we talked about so far, but sea level rise implicates affordable housing for those that are not wealthy enough to live on Star Island. So we need to look very carefully at all of these issues. And I'll just take this opportunity. The legislature cannot keep taking money out of the Sadowski Affordable Housing Fund. Sea level rise impacts that. It may not impact it for another 5 or 10 years, but after 10 years, 15 years, and 20 years, sea level rise is going to cause a housing problem and a problem for small businesses to stay in business if they're not ready now, planning now for financial realities with government assistance and private assistance and their own sweat and equity.
I knew this was going to be a spirited conversation, and you all did not disappoint. We're winding down a little bit here. We just have about 10 minutes left. So one thing I want to make sure we get in here is that we have a lot of future leaders from St. Petersburg College and elsewhere that are keenly interested in these subjects. And if you maybe start with JP, do you have any recommendations on how these future leaders can start getting into these areas? Any jobs, careers, education? What suggestions might you have if they're really invested in this and want to do more?
Sure. I mean, I think if you're truly passionate about these issues, you can easily forge a career in these fields. I'm an attorney by training, and I've I came to the study of law with the express intention to work on environmental conservation issues. And I guess, if you're passionate about it, and if you really care about these issues and you really care about a state like Florida, you can make a huge impact by dedicating yourself to a career in this particular realm. So I think you're coming into it at a really opportune time.
On education and career opportunities, to answer your question or to pick up on that, Christian, and what JP said, it's tremendous opportunity. We need to learn everything to understand better geologic history, as I say, because to educate people that the 6,000 years of sea level being stable was why it was an anomaly, that sea level normally goes up and down 400 feet. That's an astounding fact, but it's really basic geology. It goes with the ice age cycles that nobody disputes. They just hadn't really thought through the other side of the ice getting bigger and smaller. Okay, and that was natural. What does it mean for energy production? Of course, the technology issues, the financial issues, the social issues, but the idea that the world is going to look different by the end of this century. We may not be alive personally, but by the end of the century, sea level is going to be somewhere between 2 and 7 feet higher by the latest estimate. And that's going to change not just Florida, every coastal community. There's 140 coastal nations. There's 24 states in the United States that border the ocean, okay? There's 10,000 cities from Boston to Bangladesh and from Vancouver to Vanuatu, okay? I mean, that wherever you want to look, there are places that are going to change because we assumed that sea level was stable. And as long as sea level is stable, the shoreline is stable, right? But it turns out that the last few thousand years have been an anomaly and they fooled us. So we have to do a couple of things. We have to slow the warming to the degree that we're the trigger of it. Regardless, even if we get to stop greenhouse gases, we have to be more resilient and we have to begin adapting now in advance, knowing that sea level will be several feet higher, even if we do everything that's been mentioned on this hour-long great discussion.
Mitch, what are your thoughts for future leaders? How can they get involved?
Well, they can understand there's another dimension to the term underwater mortgage. We need to, education is key, but so is community activism. It's going to the legislature. It's insisting that everyone, not just the senator, but everyone in the legislature, past, future and now, address the impacts of sea level rise from a budgetary standpoint with all programs. It's extremely important. It's like going in the federal realm to the Congressional Budget Office and saying, what's the impact? We need to have an impact statement about sea level rise, not just general environmental impacts, but sea level rise impacts in Florida. One of the most exciting fields that I can think of, unfortunately, is one of the most severe, and that is being an expert in the social science of relocation. It's engineering, it's psychology, it's personal finance, it's governmental legislation, and so on. So I think that there should be a specific institute. I know John has an institute, et cetera, but there should be an institute that deals with, or a think tank, if you will, like ISPS, that deals with understanding what the role of a relocation counselor would be to help people understand, people that are educated, people that are uneducated. We all need to work together to approach this. We're not going to stop the seas from rising. I learned that clearly and I hear that clearly, but we can start to prepare financially and educationally, and we are way behind. I feel like we're back, I don't know, in the Eisenhower administration. This is 2022. We can do better.
And by the way, we can slow the warming. Let's be clear. We can slow the warming and eventually slow the rate of sea level rise. Let me be clear about that. It's just that it's wrong to think we can stop it.
Yes, and Florida is the third largest producer of greenhouse gases in the United States. You got to start somewhere. You can't wait for Xi over in China to do it. It all takes everyone at a local basis. And they say politics is all local. Well, sea level rise and greenhouse gas reductions, that's all local too. We can't just use it as an excuse to say, well, when they do it, we'll do it. It'll be too late. It's already too late. John is right. It can be slowed, but it's coming and we need to be prepared for it. And if we don't, that's the definition of negligence. reckless conduct.
Senator, for maybe our last thought, how can future leaders move on and be part of this conversation and make a difference? Senator?
Thank you. No, I think my colleagues did a great job summing up, what our future leaders should be looking at and what they should be considering. And you really have to think about not just all the sectors that are affected by sea level rise. I mean, it really does range everywhere from education to banking to all sorts of industries that will be affected by sea level rise. But ultimately, if you have the courage to get into public office and really, become a public servant and be a policymaker, I could tell you, if you would have asked me 10 or 12 years ago if I was going to be, in this position, I would have said no way. Being in public office is not for the faint of heart. It is very difficult. We are constantly, just in the hot seat, making very difficult decisions about policy, funding, and again, yes, the sea level rise issue is a tremendously important issue, and I'm not going to disagree with any of you. But when you're looking at a state budget that has to address healthcare, education, transportation, and everything else that we have to look at, it's also a balancing act. So yes, sea level rise is of utmost importance here in our state. And every decision we make and everything we do tries to make sure that is addressed. But we also have to look at everything else that we need to be balancing here in our state. So I encourage any of you to either work as a legislative aide, work for one of our agencies, the Department of Environmental Protection, South Florida Water Management District. There's all kinds of agencies that deal with this issue, and I encourage you to either intern, get involved as work in one of them, and again, if you feel that running for office is your calling, I would encourage that as well.
Thank you, Senator. So I think my very last question, rapid fire, a single sentence answer from all four of our panelists. How long do we got? How fast do we need to figure this out?
20 years.
We need to figure it out now. If we can make some significant changes, we can staunch the bleeding, as it were.
I agree. Now is the time.
We got a week.
Well,
All this takes time. It takes legislation. It takes court challenges. It takes all that. And so when you operate quickly now, like it's a crisis, like it's a true emergency for Florida, if you wait past the week, if you wait past the next hour, you're waiting too long.
Well, you heard it here, folks, here first. We got a week, so let's get on it. I want to thank all of our panelists. That was a tremendous conversation. I know I learned a lot. Thank you all so much today. If you don't mind, we had one question that I thought was really useful in the chat, that as you go, maybe type into the chat like a resource that you think might be useful for follow-up reading, maybe a link or anything that you don't mind putting in the chat before you head out. Otherwise, I want to thank both our panelists and our attendees for being here today. JP Brooker, thank you very much. Mitch Chester, thank you. John Englander, thank you very much. Senator Ana Maria Rodriguez, thank you. Really appreciate your time and energy. For those that are interested in more of these types of conversations, please join us online on the ISPS social media pages on Instagram, Facebook, and the web. You can find all of our past videos on YouTube. And this session will indeed be recorded and posted on YouTube. So you can look for it there if you want to look back on it. And finally, I want to thank Duke Energy for being ISPS's anchor sponsor. Thank you all very much for your time and energy today. We look forward to seeing more of these conversations soon.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you all very much.
Thank you.